I checked into my shift at 8 o'clock. By 9 o'clock, the ER was a slaughterhouse, but I wasn't in the ER. I was 3 miles outside of Seattle, buried 300 feet underground in a facility that didn't officially exist, watching the end of the world arrive in the back of a black armored van. I've been a professional for 15 years. I've done tours in the sandbox with Force Recon, private contract work in places that don't show up on GPS, and security detail for men who are richer than God and twice as cruel. I thought I knew what violence looked like. I thought I knew the specific heavy silence that follows the sound of a human life ending. I thought I had seen every variation of death this world had to offer, from the clean, clinical disconnect of a drone strike to the messy, intimate brutality of a knife in a dark alley. I was wrong. Nothing I had seen, nothing I had done, prepared me for the Ethelgard Biotech facility on a Tuesday morning. My name is Elias. If you're hearing this, you probably know the name of the facility by now. It's likely scrolling across whatever news ticker is still broadcasting, or it's being whispered in the refugee camps as the place where hell opened its throat. But on that morning, it was just a job. A high-paying, low-profile gig guarding a subterranean hive of white hallways and glass labs where scientists played God with things they didn't understand. My specific post was the Level 4 loading dock. It was the deepest entry point in the complex, a concrete cavern reinforced to withstand a direct nuclear strike, accessible only by a freight elevator that took 5 minutes to descend from the surface. The air down there always tasted recycled. It had a metallic tang to it, like licking a 9-volt battery, mixed with the faint, sterile scent of ozone and industrial disinfectant. It was cold too, the kind of cold that settles in your joints and reminds you of every old injury you've picked up over a decade of combat. I was standing by the heavy blast doors, drinking lukewarm coffee that tasted like burnt plastic, chatting with Marcus. Marcus was my shift partner. He was a giant of a man, a former Marine gunner with hands the size of shovels and a laugh that echoed off the concrete walls like a mortar round. We had worked this detail together for 6 months. We knew the rhythm of the place. We knew which scientists were jerks, which ones would sneak us real coffee from the break room. And we knew that when the red light above the airlock started spinning, we shut up and looked scary. "You hear about the transport coming in?" Marcus asked, checking the safety on his P90 for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. He was nervous. Marcus was never nervous. That should have been my first warning. "Another monkey?" I asked, leaning back against the guardrail. "We got shipments of primates all the time. Rhesus macaques, mostly. Sometimes chimps. They were loud, they smelled bad, and I tried not to think about what happened to them once they went through the inner doors." "No," Marcus lowered his voice, leaning in closer. "Human asset. Field extraction from a crash site in the Cascades. Rumor is, the guy isn't sick. He's wrong." "Wrong how?" "Just wrong. Special containment protocols. They cleared the entire transport corridor." Level 5. Hazmat team. Dr. Eris is coming down personally to oversee the intake. I frowned. Dr. Eris was the lead virologist, a man who treated the security staff like furniture. If he was coming down to the dock, this wasn't standard operating procedure. This was something high value, or high risk. "Field extraction," I muttered. "From a crash site? Since when do we do recovery ops?" "Since the payload is worth more than the plane," Marcus said grimly. Before I could ask what that meant, the heavy hydraulic hiss of the airlock filled the bay. The sound was deafening, a pressurized scream of air being cycled out. The massive steel blast doors groaned, the locking mechanisms disengaging with a series of loud mechanical clanks that vibrated through the floor plates and up into my boots. The doors slid open. A black armored transport van rolled in. It wasn't one of ours. No markings, no plates, just matte black armor and run-flat tires that squealed against the pristine white epoxy floor. It was flanked by 4 men in hazmat suits, Class A gear, fully self-contained breathing apparatus with thick rubber seals and gold-tinted visors. They weren't carrying standard-issue sidearms. They were carrying shock prods and tranquilizer rifles. The van stopped in the center of the intake circle. The engine cut, but the vehicle didn't go silent. From inside the reinforced rear compartment, I heard a sound. It was a thud. Heavy, rhythmic, and impossibly strong. Something was throwing itself against the interior plating of that van. The vehicle, which must have weighed 6 tons, rocked on its suspension with every impact. Thump. The van shook. Thump. The tires groaned under the shift and weight. "Secure the perimeter," the lead hazmat guy shouted. His voice was tinny and distorted through the comm speaker on his chest. "Do not approach the subject. Weapons hot." I took a step back, my hand instinctively dropping to the grip of my sidearm. I unclipped the retention strap. "Marcus," I murmured, keeping my eyes on the van. "Something's not right." "Yeah," Marcus said, his voice tight. He had raised his P90 to the low ready. "That's a lot of force for one guy." The back doors of the van flew open. The smell hit me instantly. Even from 30 feet away, even through the filtered air of the dock, I caught it. It wasn't the smell of a sick person. It was the smell of a battlefield 3 days after the fighting stopped. Copper and rot, the sweet, cloying stench of old blood, and the sharp ammonia reek of fear sweat. It was like a butcher shop left unplugged in the middle of July. They wheeled out a gurney. Strapped to it was a man, or what was left of one. He was wearing the tattered remains of a flight suit, stained dark with fluids I didn't want to identify. He was thrashing against the thick leather restraints with a violence that shook the heavy steel frame of the gurney. His skin was gray, the color of wet ash or poured concrete. It looked dry, pulled tight over his muscles like shrink wrap, but it was the noise that made the hair on my arms stand up. He wasn't screaming. He wasn't begging to be let go. He was making a wet clicking sound in the back of his throat, a rapid, staccato vibration, like a predator purring or insects skittering over dry leaves. Click, 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 hiss. "Move him to the transfer airlock." Dr. B. Eris had appeared from the observation deck, shouting orders through the intercom system. "Get him into containment, now." The hazmat team moved in. They were terrified. I could see it in their body language, the way they hesitated, the way their hands shook as they gripped the gurney. They knew something we didn't. I watched as they pushed the gurney toward the decontamination chamber. The prisoner, Patient Zero, snapped his head toward the nearest guard. "Look at his eyes," Marcus whispered. I looked. The man's eyes were white. Not rolled back, not clouded with cataracts. They were stark, milk-white voids. The pupils were blown out so wide they had swallowed the iris completely, leaving nothing but that abyssal, milky emptiness. And the veins around his eyes, they were black. Thick, dark spiderwebs pulsing under the gray skin of his temples. They were moving him across the threshold of the airlock when it happened. One of the hazmat guys stumbled. Maybe he slipped on a patch of oil. Maybe his boots lost traction on the smooth floor. Or maybe he was just shaking so hard his legs gave out. He grabbed the side of the gurney to steady himself. It was a mistake. Patient Zero lunged. He didn't move like a man. He moved like a coiled spring releasing tension. He snapped his head forward with a speed that blurred in the air. He didn't just bite. He snapped his jaws shut like a wolf trap. He tore through the hazmat suit's thick rubber neck seal like it was wet paper. The sound was hideous. A wet tearing noise followed immediately by a high-pressure spray. Blood erupted from the guard's neck in a bright crimson arc, painting the white floor, the side of the van, and the visor of the man next to him. The guard hit the deck, gurgling, his hands flying up to clutch at a throat that was no longer there. "Contact!" I screamed, drawing my weapon. "Put him down!" The remaining 3 hazmat guys panicked. They scrambled back, slipping in the blood. One of them raised a tranquilizer rifle and fired, but his aim was wild. The dart sparked off the metal frame of the gurney. Patient Zero roared, a sound that was half scream, half gurgle, and twisted his body. I heard a sickening crack, like a dry branch snapping under a boot. He had broken his own arm. To get out of the restraint, the bone jutted through the gray skin of his forearm, jagged and white, but he didn't even flinch. He didn't scream in pain. He didn't pause. He used the leverage of his broken arm to rip the other strap free. He launched himself off the gurney. He didn't land on his feet. He landed on all fours, crouched like a beast, and immediately sprang at the next closest scientist. "Marcus, clear the lane," I yelled. I raised my rifle. I didn't hesitate. I fell into the training. Front sight post, center mass, squeeze, bang bang. 2 rounds of 5.56 slammed into patient Zero's chest. I saw the impacts. I saw the gray flesh ripple as the bullets tore through him. He didn't stop. He didn't even slow down. A normal man takes 2 rounds to the chest. He goes down. Shock sets in. The hydrostatic pressure disrupts the organs. The pain overrides the brain. But this thing, he took the rounds like they were mosquito bites. No flinch. No stumble. He tackled the scientist, a woman in a blue lab coat, and hammered her face into the concrete floor. The sound of her skull hitting the ground was a wet thud that echoed through the dock. He was on her instantly, tearing, biting, ripping. "Headshots," I roared, adjusting my aim. "Go for the head." I took a breath. I forced my hands to be steady. The target was moving erratically, jerking and twitching as he fed. Squeeze. The round caught patient Zero just above the ear. It took the top of his skull off. Dark, almost black blood sprayed into the air. He dropped instantly, collapsing on top of the scientist like a puppet with cut strings. Silence slammed back into the room. For a second, the only sound was the high-pitched whine of the ventilation system and the wet, bubbling gasps of the first guard who had been bitten. "Jesus Christ," Marcus whispered. He moved forward, weapon raised, scanning the room. "Medics, get a trauma team down here now." I kept my rifle trained on the corpse of patient Zero. I walked towards the bitten guard. His name was Miller. I'd played poker with him 2 nights ago. He was a good kid, had a wife in Tacoma, and a baby on the way. Miller was convulsing on the floor. His blood was mixing with the decontamination foam that was starting to spray from the ceiling vents. I watched, horrified, as the veins in his face turned black. It looked like ink was being injected into his bloodstream, racing from the wound in his neck toward his eyes. "Help him," Marcus said, reaching for his trauma kit. He drops to one knee beside Miller. "Don't touch him," I ordered. The tone of my voice stopped Marcus cold. It wasn't a request. It was a command born of a sudden primal realization. "Elias, he's bleeding out." "Look at his veins, Marcus. Look at his skin." Miller's skin was graying rapidly. The pallor swept over him like a shadow. He was thrashing, his heels drumming a chaotic rhythm on the floor. He gagged, choking on his own blood, and then he stopped. He went perfectly still. "He's gone," Marcus said, his voice cracking. "Damn it, he's gone." I checked my watch. 45 seconds. It had been 45 seconds since the bite. "Back away," I said. I took a step back, raising my rifle again. "Marcus, get away from him. He's dead. Elias, what are you?" Then the corpse opened its eyes. They were milk white. Miller didn't wake up like a groggy person coming out of a faint. He snapped upright. He defied gravity, hinging at the waist with a mechanical, jerky speed that no human core strength should possess. He stood up in one fluid, unnatural motion. His head snapped toward Marcus. He hissed. That same wet, clicking sound I had heard from the van. Click, click, hiss. "Marcus, move." The alarm sirens began to wail. It wasn't the fire alarm. It was the bio-breach klaxon. A deafening, oscillating scream that signaled a level 5 containment failure. The blast doors behind us began to close. The heavy steel shutters were descending, sealing us in with the monster. "Lockdown," the automated voice droned. It was a calm female voice, completely at odds with the nightmare unfolding in front of us. Sector 4 isolation in progress. Purge imminent. The thing that used to be Miller launched itself at us. There is a moment in combat called the OODA loop. Observe, orient, decide, act. It's the mental process you go through when a threat appears. If you can cycle through it faster than your enemy, you live. If you hesitate, you die. I didn't hesitate. I observed the threat. Miller was dead, and the thing wearing his face was trying to kill my partner. I oriented myself. I was 10 feet away, clear line of fire. I decided, kill it. I acted. I put a bullet between Miller's eyes before his feet even left the ground. The round took him in the T-zone eyes and nose. The impact snapped his head back. He crumpled to the floor, sliding in his own blood. "What the hell is happening, Elias?" Marcus yelled over the sirens. He was backing away, his P90 shaking in his hands. He looked from Miller to patient zero to the scientist on the floor. He was dead. I checked his pulse. He was dead. "Infection," I said. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. I scanned the room. The other two hazmat guys were backing into the corner, screaming into their radios. But I wasn't looking at them. I was looking at the scientist, the woman patient zero had mauled. She was twitching. Her arm, which had been nearly severed, flopped uselessly against the floor, but her legs were kicking. Her back arched. The black veins were already racing up her neck, turning her skin the color of a storm cloud. "The transition time," I said, realizing the horror of the math. "It's not hours. It's not even minutes. It's seconds." "We need to leave," Marcus said. "We need to get to the elevators." "Elevators are locked down," I said, pointing to the red strobe lights flashing above the lift bay. "Protocol 9. Nothing goes up. Nothing comes down." "Then we blow the stairs," Marcus said. He was panicking, his training fighting a losing war against his fear. "Look out!" I screamed. The scientist on the floor screeched. She scrambled up, missing half her face, her jaw hanging by a thread of skin. She didn't look at her injuries. She didn't scream in pain. She looked at the nearest hazmat guard. She sprinted. It wasn't a shamble. It was a full-speed athletic sprint. She hit the guard with the force of a linebacker, driving him into the wall. She didn't bite him immediately. She slammed his head against the concrete, stunning him, and then she buried her face in his neck. The guard screamed, a sound that was cut short as she tore his throat out. "Service corridor," I yelled, grabbing Marcus by his vest and hauling him backward. "Move." We sprinted toward the service corridor access door. Behind us, the chaos was absolute. The remaining guards were firing wildly now. Bullets sparked off the walls, ricocheting dangerously close to us. I heard the wet tearing of flesh, the crunch of bone, and the inhuman snarling of the things that were multiplying by the second. We hit the corridor door just as the heavy steel fire shutters began to slide down. "Slide," I yelled. We dropped to the floor and rolled under the descending metal. The teeth of the shutter slammed into the concrete inches behind my boots, sealing the loading dock. We were in the Sector 3 hallway. The silence here was heavy, broken only by the muffled screams coming from behind the steel door we had just cleared. The lights in the hallway were flickering. The facility's AI was rerouting power to containment protocols. Strobe flashes of white and emergency red painted the walls in disorienting pulses. "Command, this is Team Leader Elias," I shouted into my radio, pressing the transmit button on my shoulder mic. "We have a containment breach in the dock. Multiple hostiles. Lethal force authorized. Do you copy?" Static. Just a hiss of white noise. "Command, do you copy?" "Nothing. Jamming," Marcus said, checking his own rig. He tapped the display on his wrist unit. "The system automatically jams outgoing signals during a level 5 to prevent data leaks. We're cut off." "We're not just cut off," I said, checking my weapon. I had 28 rounds left in the magazine, 2 spares on my belt. "We're locked in." "We go to the central hub," Marcus said, his breathing ragged. "Security Chief Miller is there. We can override the lockdown from the main desk." "Miller's dead, Marcus. I just shot him." "No, the other Miller. The site chief, upstairs." "Right," I said, trying to clear my head. "Right. Central hub." We moved. Standard tactical formation. I took point. Marcus watched our 6. We moved down the hallway, boots silent on the linoleum. We needed to get to the central hub, take the stairs up to the surface, and blow the containment charges behind us. That was the protocol. If the facility is compromised, you collapse the tunnels, you bury it. But the facility was waking up to the nightmare faster than we could run. We passed the glass walls of the observation labs. These were supposed to be secure environments, sealed rooms where researchers studied pathogens behind 3 inches of ballistic glass. Inside Lab 3B, I saw a researcher banging on the glass. His mouth was open in a silent scream. His lab coat was torn. Behind him, 3 of his colleagues were tearing into a security guard. It was a slaughterhouse. I watched as the guard on the floor stopped struggling. I watched as the black veins raced up his face. I watched as he stood up, joined the pack, and turned on the researcher banging on the glass. They dragged him down. The blood smeared across the window until I couldn't see the faces anymore, just the red handprints sliding down the glass. "Don't look," I told Marcus. "Keep moving." "They're everywhere," Marcus whispered. "Elias, how did it spread so fast? It's been 2 minutes." "It's exponential," I said. 1 bites 2, 3 bites 6, 6 bite 12. In a confined space like this, I didn't finish the sentence. The math was simple. There were 200 people working in this facility. If the turn time was 45 seconds, we had maybe 10 minutes before every single living soul in this hole was either dead or hunting us. We reached the blast doors to the central hub. This was the heart of the facility. A wide atrium connecting the lower labs to the administrative offices. It was usually full of tech bros in lab coats holding tablets and drinking espressos. Now, it was a war zone. The doors were open. Security teams from the upper levels had descended. They were forming a firing line near the cafeteria entrance, using overturned tables as cover. "Hold fire, friendlies," I shouted, raising my hands as we emerged from the corridor. The security captain, a guy named Henderson, waved us through. He looked pale, sweat beading on his forehead. "Elias, what the hell is going on down there?" Henderson yelled over the din of the alarms. "It's loose, Henderson. Everything in the dock is dead. Patient 0 is a carrier. The vector is fluid transfer. Bites, scratches, blood in the eyes. And it's fast, less than a minute to turn." "A minute?" Henderson stared at me. "That's impossible." "I watched it happen," I snapped. "We need to seal the crash." The cafeteria doors exploded outward. It wasn't a few of them. It was a tide. A flood of gray bodies poured out of the cafeteria. Staff, cooks, researchers. They weren't shambling. They were sprinting. They scrambled over the counters, throwing themselves at the security line with zero regard for self-preservation. They were fast. Terrifyingly fast. "Open fire," Henderson screamed. The atrium became a deafening echo chamber of gunfire. The security team opened up with everything they had. P90s, shotguns, sidearms. I saw infected bodies jerking as bullets impacted. I saw limbs blown off. I saw chests cavitated by hollow point rounds. But unless they hit the brain, they kept coming. A woman in a chef's uniform, missing an arm, leaped over the barricade. She tackled Henderson, driving him to the ground. She didn't go for his weapon. She went for his face. She tore his throat out before he could even scream. "Fall back." I grabbed Marcus by the vest. "To the stairwell." The line broke. Panic took over. I watched trained men I had served with, lose their minds. They turned to run. And that was their death sentence. You can't outrun something that doesn't feel pain or fatigue. The infected dragged them down. The sound was wet tearing cloth and snapping bone. The screams were cut short, replaced by that wet, clicking purr. Marcus and I fired as we retreated. I dropped a researcher who was lunging at me. Headshot. He folded. I spun and put 2 rounds into the chef who was eating Henderson. She dropped. "Go. Go. Go." We made it to the heavy fire door of the north stairwell. I shoved it open, pulled Marcus through, and slammed it shut. I spun the locking wheel, feeling the mechanism engage, just as a body slammed against the other side, then another, then a dozen. They were piling up against the steel. I could hear them scratching at the metal. I could hear them hammering on the door with their fists, breaking their own bones in their frenzy to get at us. "We're safe," Marcus panted, sliding down the wall. He was hyperventilating. "We're safe." The stairwell was cool and quiet, the concrete thick enough to muffle the screams from the atrium. I looked at Marcus. He was pale. His hands were shaking violently. "Check your gear," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Ammo count." Marcus looked down at his chest rig. Then he froze. There was a tear in his tactical sleeve. A small, jagged rip in the fabric, and beneath it, on his forearm, was a scratch. It wasn't deep, just a graze. Maybe from the doorframe, maybe from a fingernail in the chaos. "Marcus," I said. He followed my gaze. He saw the scratch. It wasn't bleeding red. The blood oozing from the cut was dark, almost black, and the veins around it, they were already darkening. "No," Marcus whispered. He pulled his arm back, covering it with his hand. "No, it's just a scratch. I caught it on the door. It's fine." I backed away. I raised my rifle. "I saw how fast it happens, Marcus. I'm fine." He stood up, taking a step toward me. His eyes were wide, pleading. "Elias, it's me. We spent Christmas together. I'm fine." He coughed. A spray of black bile hit the floor between us. He stopped. He looked at the black splatter. He looked up at me. I saw the change happen in real time. The capillaries in his eyes were bursting. The white was fading, consumed by the hemorrhage. His pupils were blowing out. "Do it," he wheezed. He clutched his chest, his fingers digging into his tactical vest. "Elias, do it before I..." He fell to his knees, gagging. His back arched unnaturally, his spine bending with a sickening crack. He looked up. His pupils were gone. The eyes were milk white. He snarled. I pulled the trigger. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. Marcus fell back. I didn't say a prayer. I didn't have time. I looked at the blast door. The wheel was starting to turn from the other side. They were learning. I turned and started to climb. I was on sub-level 3. The surface was 300 feet up, and between me and the sky was an entire facility of people who were already dead, but just hadn't stopped moving yet. I checked my mag. 20 rounds left. The world had ended at 8:42 a.m. It was now 8:55 a.m. And I was just getting started. The echo of the gunshot that killed Marcus didn't fade. It just got swallowed by the alarms. I stared at him for a second, maybe two, a single second to mourn 6 years of friendship, of shared beers and bad deployments, of secrets kept and trust earned. That was all the time the end of the world allowed me. He was slumped against the concrete wall of the stairwell. A dark hole between his eyes, the black fluid that had replaced his blood, already pooling on the collar of his tactical vest. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't close his eyes. In the field, you learn that the dead don't care about your rituals. The dead are just geometry obstacles or cover. And right now, Marcus was an obstacle I had to step over to survive. Behind him, the heavy steel door to the lower level groaned. The iron wheel in the center was turning. Slowly, jerkily, but it was turning. They weren't just mindless eating machines. They retained some fragment of muscle memory, some residual understanding of how doors worked. Or maybe they were just throwing themselves against the mechanism until friction did the rest. It didn't matter how they were doing it. It only mattered that they were coming. I turned my back on my friend and started climbing. My boots hammered against the metal treads of the stairs. Sub-level 3 was gone. The loading dock was a tomb. That left sub-level 2, medical and research. If I could get to the secondary security station on that floor, I might be able to override the blast doors, or at least trigger the external distress beacon that bypassed the facility's internal jamming. It was a long shot, but long shots were the only ammunition I had left. The air in the stairwell was getting hotter. The ventilation systems had shut down or reversed, and the smell was rising with the heat. That copper and rotten meat stench of the infection, mixed now with the acrid smoke of burnt propellant and the chemical tang of fear. I checked my weapon as I moved. 19 rounds in the magazine. 2 spares on my belt. My sidearm was fully loaded, but against these things, a 9mm was just a suggestion. You needed hydrostatic shock. You needed to liquefy the brainstem. I reached the landing for sub-level 2. The fire door here had a small reinforced glass window. I pressed my back against the wall, slicing the angle carefully to peer through the wire mesh glass. What I saw stopped the breath in my throat. Sub-level 2 was the facility's hospital wing. It was where we treated chemical burns, bio-exposure, and the occasional workplace accident. It was designed to be sterile, white, and calm. Now it was a Jackson Pollock painting done in arterial red and necrotic black. The corridor beyond the door was a kill box. The emergency lights were strobing, casting the hallway in frantic pulses of red and shadow. In those flashes, I saw the end of the Ethelgard facility playing out in real time. A team of medical staff doctors in blue scrubs, nurses in pink, were sprinting toward the far end of the hall. They were screaming, their mouths open wide, cords of tendon standing out in their necks. Behind them, keeping pace with a terrifying silent athleticism, was a pack of the infected. They didn't run like zombies in the movies. They didn't shamble. They ran with the predatory grace of wolves, heads low, arms pumping. I watched a man in a lab coat, someone I recognized. A senior geneticist named Dr. Evans leap over a gurney with Olympic agility. He landed on the back of a fleeing nurse, his momentum driving her face first into the linoleum. He didn't bite her immediately. He smashed her head against the floor, once, twice, 3 times, silencing her struggles with brutal efficiency. Then, as she went limp, he tore into the soft flesh where her neck met her shoulder. The violence was mechanical. It was industrious. There was no rage in it, just a biological imperative executed at maximum speed. I had to go out there. The stairwell was a dead end. The infected from below would breach the door any second, and if I stayed here, I'd be crushed between the hammer rising from the basement and the anvil waiting on this floor. I took a breath, held it, and gripped the door handle. I needed to move fast. Cover to cover. The security station was 40 meters down the hall, past the triage rooms and the chemical showers. I shoved the door open and stepped into the nightmare. The sound hit me like a physical blow. The alarms were louder out here, mixing with the wet, tearing sounds of the feeding and the high-pitched, desperate screams of the dying. Move, I whispered to myself. Move or die. I brought my rifle up, stock tight against my shoulder, both eyes open. I advanced down the right side of the corridor, checking my corners. A gurney came spinning out of a patient room, crashing into the wall a few feet in front of me. A security guard, Jenkins, a kid fresh out of the academy, stumbled out after it. He was firing his sidearm blindly backward into the room. Bang, bang, bang. Back, he screamed. Stay back. He wasn't aiming, he was panicking. The slide of his pistol locked back empty. He kept pulling the trigger, the dry click, 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 lost in the cacophony. An infected researcher lunged from the room. Jenkins tried to swing his empty pistol like a club, but he was too slow. The researcher ducked under the blow and tackled him. They hit the floor in a tangle of limbs. I was 10 feet away. I had the shot. Clear, I shouted, a reflex from a lifetime of training. Jenkins looked up at me, his eyes wide with terror. The infected researcher was on top of him, snapping at his face. Jenkins had his forearm wedged under the thing's chin, holding the gnashing teeth inches from his nose. I lined up the sights. The red dot hovered over the researcher's ear. Crack. The shot was clean. The researcher's head snapped to the side, and he collapsed instantly, dead weight. Get up, I yelled, moving forward. Jenkins, get up. We need to move. Jenkins scrambled out from under the corpse. He was covered in blood, some of it his, some of it the researcher's. He looked at me, gasping, his chest heaving. Elias, he choked out. There, They're not stopping. I shot him. I shot him 3 times in the chest, and he didn't stop. Headshots only, I said, grabbing him by the harness and hauling him to his feet. Check your bitten status. Did he get you? Jenkins looked at his arms, his hands. He was shaking so hard his teeth were chattering. I don't think so. I think I'm clear. Reload, I ordered. We're going to the security station. It's gone, Jenkins said, his eyes darting around the hallway. They took it, the Alpha team. They were stationed there. They turned. All of them. My stomach dropped. Alpha Team was the heavy response unit. Body armor, automatic rifles, tactical discipline. If they had turned, we weren't just fighting scientists and doctors anymore. We were fighting armored, trained killers who felt no pain and had an insatiable hunger for human flesh. Then we go to the armory, I said. We need more ammo. Elias, look, Jenkins whispered. He pointed down the hall. At the far end of the corridor, where the double doors led to the main laboratories, the glass was cracking. A mass of bodies was pressing against it from the other side, dozens of them. Maybe 100. They were crushing each other against the glass, a wall of gray skin and open mouths. The glass spiderwebbed. Run, I said. We turned and sprinted. We didn't use cover. We didn't slice the pie. We ran flat out, boots slipping on the blood-slicked floor. We passed the open door of triage room 4. I glanced inside. A doctor was strapped to a treatment table, restraints on his wrists and ankles. He must have been a patient, maybe the first one brought up from the dock. He was thrashing against the straps, his back arching so violently I heard his vertebrae popping. His eyes were locked on us as we ran past. He hissed, that wet, clicking sound, and snapped his teeth at the air. We reached the intersection. Left went to the armory, right went to the executive elevators. Armory, I shouted, banking left. Jenkins was right behind me. I could hear his breathing, ragged and wet. We rounded the corner and skidded to a halt. The hallway to the armory was blocked. Not by debris, but by fire. Someone, probably the Alpha team before they turned, had deployed an incendiary barricade. The automatic fire suppression system had failed, or been disabled. Flames licked up the walls, black smoke billowing along the ceiling, and standing in front of the fire, silhouetted against the orange glow, were 3 figures. They were wearing heavy tactical riot gear, helmets with face shields, ceramic plate carriers, leg armor. They stood perfectly still, facing us. Alpha Team, Jenkins whispered. Sarge? Is that you? The figure in the center turned its head. The face shield was splattered with black gore, but through the polycarbonate, I could see the eyes. Milky white, dead. It was Sergeant Miller. No relation to the other 2 Millers, just another common name on a tombstone. He was holding an M4 carbine by the barrel, dragging the stock on the ground like a club. He didn't raise the weapon to shoot. The infection destroyed the higher brain functions needed to operate complex machinery like firearms, but it left the primal understanding of how to use a heavy object to crush a skull. Miller let out a roar, a distorted, amplified sound inside his helmet. He charged. The other 2 armored infected charged with him. The sound of their heavy boots on the floor was like a stampede. Fire, I yelled, dropping to a knee. I opened up, controlled pairs. Pop, pop. Pop, pop. My round sparked off Miller's chest plate. No effect. I adjusted aim, going for the head. The bullet struck the face shield. It cracked the polycarbonate, starring the plastic, but it didn't penetrate. The riot gear was rated for pistol caliber and shrapnel, but at this range, a 5.56 round should have punched through. The angle was bad. It deflected. Miller didn't even stumble. He was 20 feet away. 15. Legs, I shouted. Shoot the legs. I lowered my aim and swept the legs of the infected on the left. The rounds tore through the unarmored Kevlar weave of the pants. Bone shattered. The thing went down hard, face planting into the floor, but it didn't stop. It started crawling, dragging its ruined legs, clawing at the tiles with armored gloves. Jenkins was freezing up again. He fired one shot, missed, and then just stood there as Miller bore down on him. "Jenkins, move!" I tackled Jenkins, shoving him into an open doorway just as Miller swung the rifle stock. The blow missed Jenkins's head by inches, smashing into the door frame with enough force to splinter the wood and dent the drywall. We tumbled into a supply closet. I kicked the door shut and threw the deadbolt. A second later, a heavy impact shook the door. Then another. Thud, thud, thud. "They're armored," Jenkins whimpered, scrambling backward until he hit the mop sink. "We can't kill them. They're tanks. We can kill them," I said, checking my mag. 7 rounds left. We just have to get close enough to put the barrel under the helmet. "I can't do this," Jenkins said. He pulled his knees to his chest. "I can't do this, Elias. I'm not like you." I looked at the door. The wood was beginning to crack around the hinges. The armored infected outside were relentless. They would beat this door down, and then they would tear us apart. I looked around the closet. Chemicals, bleach, ammonia, industrial solvents. "Jenkins," I said, grabbing a gallon jug of bleach, "do you have a flare? A flashbang? Anything?" I have a distress flare," he said, fumbling with his pouch. "Give it to me." I took the flare. I grabbed a bottle of ammonia-based cleaner. "What are you doing?" "Basic chemistry," I said. "Chloramine gas. It won't kill them, but it might blind them or confuse their senses enough for us to slip past. And us? We hold our breath." The door hinges screamed. The top hinge popped, sending a screw flying across the room. A gray, armored hand reached through the gap, grasping blindly. "Get ready," I said. I unscrewed the caps. "When I kick this door open, you run. You don't look back. You head for the executive elevators, the lobby. If we can't go down or stay here, we have to go up. The elevators are locked." "Not the service ladder in the shaft," I said. "Now move." I poured the chemicals together on the floor in front of the door. The reaction was instant. A hissing, bubbling cloud of toxic white gas began to rise. I waited 1 second. 2. I kicked the door. It flew open, hitting Miller in the chest. He stumbled back, surprised by the sudden lack of resistance. The gas billowed out into the hallway, engulfing the armored figures. "Go!" I shoved Jenkins out. We sprinted past the infected. Miller swung blindly at us, the rifle stock whistling through the air, but the gas was thick. He roared, coughing, a wet, hacking sound. The infection kept them moving, but their lungs were still biological. They still needed air. The caustic gas was burning their throat linings, disrupting the sensory input they relied on. We scrambled past them, slipping on the slick floor. I put a round into the back of the crawling one's neck as I passed, severing the spine. It went limp. We didn't stop to check the others. We ran back toward the intersection, away from the armory, toward the elevator bank. The hallway was filling with smoke from the fire and gas from the chemical reaction. The alarms were deafening. We reached the elevator lobby. The doors were closed, the red lights pulsing. "Pry it," I ordered. Jenkins and I jammed our fingers into the seam of the center elevator doors. We pulled. The motors whined in protest, the brakes screeching. But slowly, agonizingly, the doors parted. The shaft beyond was dark. The cables hummed with tension. "Ladder is on the left," I said, shining my weapon light into the void. "It's a 100-foot climb to the surface." "I can make it," Jenkins said. He sounded hopeful for the first time. He stepped onto the ledge. And then the elevator car from above came down. It didn't come down slowly. It dropped. The cables had been cut. "Jenkins, no!" I lunged for him, grabbing the back of his vest. I wasn't fast enough. The falling elevator car, a 10-ton block of steel and glass, slammed past the open doors. The wind of its passage knocked me backward. There was a wet, crunching sound, like a watermelon being smashed with a sledgehammer. And Jenkins was gone. He didn't even scream. 1 second he was there. The next there was just the empty shaft and the echo of the impact far below. I lay on the floor staring at the open doors, gasping for air. The wind from the shaft smelled of hydraulic fluid and death. Math, I whispered to myself, just the math. I rolled over and pushed myself up. I was alone again. Marcus was dead. Jenkins was dead. The loading dock was gone. The armory was blocked. I checked my ammo. 6 rounds. I looked down the hallway. The cloud of gas was dissipating. Through the haze, I saw the silhouette of Sergeant Miller. He was standing up. He was shaking his head, clearing the gas from his visor. He saw me. He raised the rifle stock and started running. I turned and ran the other way. There was only one place left to go on this floor. The secure research wing, the labs where they kept the high-value samples. It was a dead end, but it had reinforced doors. I sprinted past the nurse's station, vaulted a gurney, and slammed my shoulder into the double doors of the research wing. They swung open. I stumbled inside and spun around to lock them. This wasn't a hallway. It was a labyrinth of glass-walled cubicles and negative pressure rooms. And it was quiet, eerily, impossibly quiet compared to the chaos outside. I jammed a chair under the door handles. It wouldn't hold Miller for long, but it would buy me seconds. I moved deeper into the wing. I needed a weapon. I needed an exit. I needed a miracle. "Is someone there?" The voice came from behind a frosted glass door marked Server Room 2. It was small, trembling male. I froze. I raised my rifle. "Identify yourself." I hissed. "Dr. Eris." The voice squeaked. Is that security? Please, you have to get me out of here." Aris, the man who started this. The man who brought the monster into the house. I moved to the door. "Open it." I can't. I barricaded it. "You have to help me." I looked back at the main doors. The chair was starting to slide across the floor as Miller pounded on the other side. Thud. Thud. The glass window in the door cracked. "Open the damn door, Aris, or I leave you here for them." There was a scraping sound, heavy servers being dragged across the floor. The lock clicked. The door opened a crack. I kicked it wide and leveled my rifle at the man inside. Dr. Eris was huddled under a desk, clutching a tablet like it was a holy relic. He looked immaculate, lab coat pristine, glasses straight. He looked like he was hiding from a tax audit, not the apocalypse. "Thank God," he breathed, standing up. "You're Elias, right? From the dock?" "You," I growled, stepping into the room and slamming the door behind me. I dragged a server rack back in front of it. "What did you bring into this facility?" "It wasn't supposed to be like this," Eris stammered. Subject 1 Alpha. The viral load was dormant. "It was supposed to be dormant. It woke up," I said, "and it's hungry." "We have to get to the surface," Aris said, adjusting his glasses. "I have the data. I have the sequence. If we can get this to the CDC, we can fix it." "There is no fixing this," I said, listening to the pounding on the outer doors. Miller had broken through. I could hear his heavy boots crunching on the glass in the lobby. He was inside the wing. "We have to move," I said. "Is there another exit from this wing?" "The ventilation maintenance hatch," Aris said, pointing to a grate in the ceiling. "It leads to the upper mechanical levels. We can climb it." "Can you climb?" I asked, looking at the soft, unathletic man. "Adrenaline is a powerful thing," Eris said, his voice trembling. Crash. The glass wall of the office next to us shattered. Miller was tearing through the cubicles, smashing everything in his path. He was hunting. He could hear us. I looked at the vent. I looked at Eris. I looked at my rifle with 6 rounds. "Up," I ordered. "Go." Eris scrambled onto a desk and pushed the grate open. He pulled himself up, grunting with effort. I followed him, boosting him through before pulling myself into the cramped metal tunnel. I dragged the grate back into place just as the door to the server room exploded inward. I looked down through the slats. Sergeant Miller stood in the room. He scanned the empty space, his head twitching. He looked at the desk. He looked at the server rack. Then, he looked up. Through the grate, his milky white eyes locked onto mine. He didn't roar. He didn't hiss. He just stared. A cold, dead intelligence calculating the distance. He raised his armored hand and punched the ceiling tile next to the vent. He began to tear the drop ceiling apart, ripping down lights and tiles to get to the ductwork. "Move, Aris," I whispered, shoving the doctor forward into the dark, dusty throat of the ventilation shaft. "Crawl." We crawled into the darkness, the sound of tearing metal chasing us, the realization settling in my gut like a stone. We weren't escaping. We were just moving to a smaller trap. And the things chasing us, too shard and strong. They were relentless. I checked my watch. 9:12 a.m. Sublevel 2 was lost. Sublevel 3 was lost. We were in the walls now, crawling like rats, while the facility burned around us. And the worst part? I knew the surface wasn't going to be any better. I could feel it in the way the building shook, in the distant, muffled thud of explosions from above. The world was dying, and I was stuck in a vent with the man who killed it. The metal ductwork vibrated against my chest, a rhythmic, terrifying shudder that traveled up through the galvanized steel and into my bones. Behind us, the sound of tearing metal was deafening. Sergeant Miller, or the armored thing that used to be him, wasn't just punching the ceiling tiles. He was ripping the HVAC system out of the ceiling mounts. I could hear the rivets popping, sharp cracks like pistol shots, followed by the groan of aluminum twisting under impossible torque. He was climbing after us, hauling that armored bulk into the crawl space with a strength that shouldn't have been possible for dead muscle. "Move, Aris, move," I hissed, shoving the doctor's shoe with my free hand. Dr. Bry, Aris was crawling on his hands and knees, sobbing with every breath. He was a man of sterile labs and touchscreens, soft around the middle, unaccustomed to the brutal physical reality of survival. He moved like a wounded seal, dragging himself over the seams of the ductwork, his lab coat snagging on screws and rivets. "It's tight," he gasped, his voice echoing tinny and distorted in the confined space. I can't breathe in here." "You'll breathe fine if you keep moving," I snarled. "If you stop, he'll pull your legs off." I looked back over my shoulder. My weapon light cut a chaotic beam through the dust that was billowing up from the destruction below. Through the haze, I saw a gloved hand smash through the bottom of the duct 10 feet back. The metal crumpled like foil. Then a helmeted head shoved through the breach. The face shield was smeared with blood and drywall dust, but those milk-white eyes caught the light, glowing with a predatory luminescence. Miller let out a sound that vibrated the walls of the vent, a wet, gurgling roar amplified by the acoustics of the metal tube. He began to crawl. The sound of his tactical gear scraping against the steel was like a knife on a chalkboard, magnified 1,000 times. "Faster!" I yelled, abandoning stealth. There was no point in being quiet when a tank was chasing you through a tin can. We scrambled forward. The duct took a sharp 90-degree turn to the left. Aris panicked, getting jammed in the corner for a heartbreaking second before I grabbed his belt and yanked him free. We scraped around the bend just as Miller's arm shot out, his fingers clawing the air where my boot had been a fraction of a second before. The air in the vent was hot, thick with the smell of burning electronics and the copper tang of the slaughter below. Sweat stung my eyes. My tactical vest, usually a comfort, felt like a lead weight in the cramped space, catching on every protrusion. I could feel the adrenaline crash waiting on the other side of this terror, the exhaustion pooling in my muscles, but I pushed it down. The math was simple: keep moving or die. "There," Ayers choked out. "The maintenance ladder." Ahead, the horizontal duct opened into a vertical shaft, the main air return for the sublevels. A rusted steel ladder was bolted to the far wall of the shaft, disappearing into the darkness above. Aris scrambled out of the duct and onto the small maintenance platform. He lunged for the ladder, missing a rung in his haste and nearly falling backward into the abyss. I caught him by the collar of his lab coat and slammed him against the rungs. "Climb," I ordered. "Don't look down, just climb." He started up. I pulled myself out of the vent and onto the platform. I turned back to the opening we had just exited. Miller was there. He filled the opening of the duct, his shoulders wedged tight against the metal sides. He was stuck. The riot gear that made him invincible was now his prison. He thrashed, roaring in frustration, his arms reaching out, snapping his jaws at the empty air 3 feet from the platform. He was pushing so hard I could see the ductwork bulging, the seams beginning to split. I raised my rifle. I had 6 rounds left. I aimed for the gap between his helmet and his chest plate. A sliver of gray neck exposed. Bang. The shot was deafening in the vertical shaft. The muzzle flash blinded me for a split second. The round hit him in the throat. Black fluid sprayed the inside of the vent. He jerked, his head slamming against the top of the duct. But he didn't stop thrashing. He didn't die. The shot hadn't severed the spine. "Save the ammo," I whispered to myself. He was stuck, for now. I turned and grabbed the ladder. The climb was brutal. We were ascending from sub-level 2 to sub-level 1, a distance of maybe 30 feet. But it felt like climbing Everest. The shaft was filled with the roar of the facility's dying systems. Fans were spinning down, bearings screaming. Distant explosions rocked the walls, sending showers of dust and rust raining down on us. We reached the service grating for sub-level 1. Eris was clinging to the ladder, his knuckles white, shaking so hard he was vibrating the steel rungs. "Open it," I said, positioning myself below him. It's stuck," he whimpered, pushing weakly at the grate. "Hit it, Aris. Hit it with your shoulder." He shoved upward. The grate groaned but didn't budge. From below, a metallic screech echoed up the shaft. I looked down. Miller had broken the duct. He had torn the steel apart and fallen to the platform. Now he was standing up. He looked up the shaft, saw us, and grabbed the ladder. "A race!" I roared. "Move!" I climbed up until I was right under him. I braced my legs on the ladder, released one hand, and shoved the butt of my rifle into the bottom of the grate. Clang! The grate popped loose, flipping over and clattering onto the floor of the room above. Eris scrambled through the hole like a panicked rat. I vaulted up right behind him, rolling onto the floor and bringing my weapon up in a smooth arc. We were in a mechanical room, air handlers, breaker boxes, the hum of backup generators. It was dim, lit only by the rotating red emergency strobes. The shadows stretched and contracted with every pulse of light, making the machinery look like crouching beasts. I kicked the grate back over the hole and dragged a heavy tool chest on top of it. It wouldn't hold Miller forever, but it would buy us time. I slumped against the metal cabinet, gasping for air. My chest burned. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the sheer metabolic cost of the last 20 minutes. Eris was curled up in the corner, hugging his tablet, rocking back and forth. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," he mumbled, his voice cracking. "The failsafes, the redundancy." I stood up. The anger that had been simmering under the panic finally boiled over. I walked over to him, grabbed him by the lapels of his pristine white coat, and hauled him to his feet. I slammed him against the wall hard enough to rattle his teeth. "Talk," I growled, my face inches from his. "Right now, you tell me exactly what we are fighting. No jargon. No bullshit. What is inside those people?" It's the adrenal override," he stammered, his eyes darting around the room. "Project Thanatos. A virus. Not exactly. It's a viral delivery system, yes, but the payload is synthetic. It was a DARPA contract. They wanted a battlefield stimulant, something that would allow a soldier to keep fighting after catastrophic injury, to turn off the pain receptors, override the shock response, and flood the system with adrenaline and cortisol. "Super soldiers," I spat. "You were trying to make Captain America." "We were trying to save lives," Aris yelled, a sudden spark of defensive pride cutting through his terror. "Do you know how many soldiers die from shock before a medic can reach them? This was supposed to keep them alive. It was supposed to be a dormant agent, activated only by extreme trauma." "Well, it's active now," I said, "and it's spreading." "The mutation," Eris whispered. The fight draining out of him. Subject 1 Alpha, the pilot. Something in his biology reacted with the agent. It mutated. It became airborne within fluids. It went from a dormant chemical trigger to a virulent pathogen. It rewrites the amygdala. It destroys the frontal cortex. It leaves nothing but the drive to feed and the drive to spread. Why do they eat? I asked. If it's a combat drug, why are they eating people? Calories, Ari said, wiping sweat from his forehead. The metabolic rate, it's off the charts. The virus hyperaccelerates the adrenal glands. They are burning 20,000 calories an hour just to stay moving. They're starving to death from the moment they turn. That's why they're so aggressive. They need fuel. Meat is fuel. So they starve? I asked. If we wait them out? Eventually, a day, maybe two. Their organs will liquefy. They'll digest their own stomach linings. But until then, they are heat-seeking missiles made of meat and teeth, I finished. I let him go. He slid down the wall, clutching his tablet. This tablet, he said, tapping the screen. It has the raw sequence data, the mutation logs. If I can get this to the secure uplink in the director's office, I can broadcast it to the CDC, to the Pentagon. They need to know how to kill it. The director's office is on this floor? Yes. North side, past the security checkpoint. And the exit? The main stairwell to the surface is right next to it. I checked my weapon. 6 rounds. My sidearm had 2 magazines left. 30 rounds of 9mm. It wasn't enough to fight a war, but it had to be enough to get to the door. Get up, I said. We're moving. We exited the mechanical room into the hallway of sublevel 1. This floor was different. Down below, it was industrial white concrete and steel. Up here, it was carpeted. Mahogany doors, brushed steel main plates, motivational posters on the walls. It was the administrative heart of Ethelgard, where the decisions were made and the profits were counted. It was also a graveyard. The red emergency lighting turned the beige carpet into a swamp of black shadows. Bodies were scattered everywhere. Men in expensive suits, women in pencil skirts. They hadn't been torn apart like the people below. Most of them had been shot. I knelt by a body near the water cooler. A man in a gray suit, single gunshot wound to the temple. A pistol lay near his hand. Suicide, I whispered. He knew. The director initiated Protocol 9, Eris said, his voice hollow. Total containment. He probably locked the elevators and then took the easy way out. I stood up. Coward. We moved silently down the hall. The carpet dampened our footsteps. But the silence was heavy, oppressive. It felt like the air itself was holding its breath. I scanned every open door, every shadow. The layout here was a maze of cubicles and offices. Too many blind spots. We reached the central reception area. The security checkpoint for the executive wing was ahead. A heavy glass partition with a metal detector and a guard station. It was quiet. Too quiet. Stay close, I signaled to Eris. We crept toward the checkpoint. The glass partition was smeared with blood, but it was intact. The gate was open. I stepped through the metal detector. It was dead. Power cut. I looked into the guard booth. Empty. A chair overturned. A coffee mug spilled. A monitor displaying static. It's clear, Eris breathed, stepping up beside me. The director's office is just down that. Click. The sound came from the darkness of the waiting area to our left. A dry, sharp click, like teeth snapping together. I spun, raising my rifle. Contact left. They rose from behind the leather sofas in the waiting area. 4 of them. They weren't civilians. They were the security detail for this floor. Tactical vests, sidearms holstered, batons on their belts. Their eyes caught the red strobe light, flashing white, black, white, black. They didn't roar. They didn't hesitate. They sprinted back. I shoved Aris toward the corridor. The lead guard was on me in a second. He was big, a linebacker type. He lowered his shoulder and slammed into me. The impact knocked the wind out of me, and sent my rifle skittering across the floor. We hit the ground. It was heavy, dense with that unnatural muscle tension. His hands went for my throat. I got my forearm up, jamming it under his chin, holding him back. His jaws snapped inches from my face. I could smell him, that rot smell, mixed with the mint of chewing gum. I drew my knife with my left hand, a 4-inch fixed blade I kept on my belt. I drove it into the side of his neck. He didn't flinch. He didn't even acknowledge the wound. He just pushed harder, his thumbs digging into my windpipe, crushing the cartilage. Black blood sprayed from the knife wound, hot and slick on my face. "Die," I grunted. I ripped the knife out and drove it up, under the jaw, into the brain pan. He went rigid. The light went out of those milk-white eyes. He collapsed on top of me, dead weight. I shoved him off and scrambled to my feet. Eris, the doctor, was running. He had panicked, abandoning the plan, sprinting down the hallway toward the director's office. 2 of the infected guards were chasing him. The 3rd was turning toward me. I drew my pistol. Pop, pop. 2 rounds to the chest to slow the one charging me. It stumbled. I adjusted my aim. The 3rd shot took it in the nose. It dropped. I turned toward Aris. He was fumbling with the door handle of the director's office. It was locked. He was screaming, hammering on the wood. "Shoot them," he shrieked. "Shoot them." The 2 guards were closing the distance, 20 feet. 10. I steadied my grip. The hallway was long, the lighting terrible. If I missed, I hit Aris. I fired. The bullet hit the guard on the left in the shoulder. It spun him around, but he didn't drop. The 2nd guard leaped. He hit Aris from behind, slamming him into the door. Aris screamed, a high, thin sound of pure terror. The guard buried his face in the junction of Aris's neck and shoulder. "No!" I roared. I sprinted down the hall, firing on the move. 1 shot, 2, 3. The guard on Aris's back jerked as a round took him in the spine. He slid off, collapsing to the floor. The other guard, the one I had spun around, lunged at me as I passed. I didn't stop to shoot. I pistol whipped him, the heavy steel of the slide connecting with his temple. He went down. I put a round in the back of his head without breaking stride. I reached Aris. He was slumped against the door, sliding down the wood. He was clutching his shoulder, blood bright red. Human blood was pulsing between his fingers. "Open the door," I commanded, kicking the dead guard away. I fired 2 rounds into the lock mechanism. The wood splintered. I kicked the door open and dragged Aris inside. I slammed the door and shoved a heavy oak bookshelf in front of it. Silence returned, heavy and suffocating, broken only by Aris's ragged breathing. The director's office was opulent. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the underground atrium garden, now dark. A massive mahogany desk dominated the room. I knelt beside Aris. "Let me see," I said. "It burns," Aris whispered. His face was gray, slick with sweat. "It feels like fire." He pulled his hand away. The bite was deep. The guard had taken a chunk of flesh out of the trapezius muscle. The edges of the wound were ragged. But it was the color that stopped my heart. The blood wasn't staying red. Even as I watched, the edges of the wound were darkening. Black veins were already radiating outward, spider webbing under the pale skin of his neck, reaching toward his jawline. 45 seconds, I whispered. The math, always the math. Aris looked at the wound. Then he looked at me. The denial in his eyes shattered, replaced by a terrifying clarity. "The tablet," he gasped, reaching into his coat with his good hand. He pulled it out. The screen was cracked, but it was still glowing. "Take it. The upload code is 88 Alpha." I took the tablet. "Aris, don't," he cut me off. He tried to stand, but his legs gave out. He slumped back against the bookshelf. "You know what happens next. You saw Marcus." I gripped my pistol. The polymer felt slick in my sweating palm. "I can't wait," Aris said. His voice was changing. Thicker, wetter. He coughed, and a speck of black bile landed on his white lapel. The hunger. I can feel it starting. It's like a hollow pit in my stomach. It's overwhelming. He looked up at me. His eyes were watering. The capillaries were starting to burst, turning the whites pink, then red. Please, he whispered. I don't want to be one of them. I don't want to be hungry forever. I stood up. I checked the chamber of my pistol. 1 round in the pipe, 12 in the mag. I'm sorry, Doc. Don't be, he wheezed. He closed his eyes. A tear leaked out, tracking through the dirt on his face. Just make it quick. Before he convulsed. His head snapped back, hitting the bookshelf with a thud. His back arched, his hands clawed at the carpet. Aris. He opened his eyes. The pupils were gone. The irises were gone, just white. He hissed. I raised the pistol. The front sight settled on the center of his forehead. Goodbye, I whispered. I pulled the trigger. Crack. The sound was shockingly loud in the quiet office. Ari slumped sideways. The threat was gone. But the sound carried. Outside the office, in the hallway, in the atrium, in the vents, I heard it. A pause, a beat of silence. And then, a roar. Not one voice. Hundreds. They had heard the shot. Every infected on sublevel 1. Everything in the vents. Every monster roaming the halls. They knew where I was. I looked at the tablet in my hand. Then I looked at the door. The bookshelf shuddered as something heavy slammed against it from the other side. I was alone. I was out of friends. I was running out of ammo. And the dinner bell had just rung. The roar was a physical thing. It vibrated through the floorboards, up the legs of the heavy mahogany desk, and into my boots. It wasn't just anger. It was anticipation. The dinner bell had rung, and I was the main course. I checked my weapon. 1 round in the chamber, 12 in the magazine. 13 rounds to fight my way out of a facility infested with hundreds of super predators. The math wasn't just bad. It was a death sentence. The bookshelf shuddered again. A fist smashed through the wood, gray and bloodied, clawing blindly at the air. Then another fist. The wood splintered with a sharp crack that sounded like a gunshot. They were tearing the barricade apart. I looked at the tablet. 88 Alpha. The upload code. If Eris was right, this data could save whoever was left on the surface. If there was anyone left. Move, I whispered to myself. Just move. I scanned the room. The director's office was a dead end. One door, now blocked by a failing barricade, and a horde of hungry dead, floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the atrium. The atrium. I ran to the window. The glass was reinforced, designed to withstand seismic activity, but it wasn't bulletproof. Below me, the atrium was a pit of shadows and movement. The emergency strobes from the upper levels cast long, dancing beams of red light into the gloom. I could see them down there. Hundreds of them. They were milling about, climbing over the furniture, drawn to the sound of the gunshot like moths to a flame. But across the atrium, maybe 50 feet away, was the sky bridge, a glass tunnel connecting the executive wing to the main elevator bank, the one with a dedicated express lift to the surface helipad. If I could get across the atrium, the bookshelf gave a groan of surrender. The top half collapsed inward, spilling books and wood chips across the carpet. A face appeared in the gap. A woman, her jaw unhinged, her eyes white and staring. She hissed, spotting me instantly. Fresh meat, I muttered. I raised my pistol and fired 2 rounds into the glass window. Crack. Crack. Spider webs bloomed, but the pain held. I grabbed the heavy bronze bust of some dead founder from the director's desk and hurled it at the weakened glass. Crash. The window shattered outward, raining shards down into the atrium garden 3 stories below. The sound was deafening, a cascade of breaking glass that echoed through the cavernous space. Every head in the atrium turned up. I didn't look down. I jumped. I aimed for the decorative trellis that ran up the side of the building, a sturdy iron framework covered in ivy. I hit it hard, the metal biting into my palms. The impact knocked the wind out of me, jarring my shoulders, but I held on. Above me, the infected woman squeezed through the broken bookshelf. She didn't hesitate. She threw herself out the window after me, her arms outstretched, fingers hooked into claws. She missed the trellis. She plummeted past me, silent and flailing, and smashed into the concrete planter below with a wet thud. She didn't die. I saw her broken body twitching, trying to drag itself toward the sound of my breathing. I started to climb. Not up, down. The sky bridge was on the second level. I was on the third. The ivy was slick with condensation from the misting system, which was still running on its automated timer, oblivious to the apocalypse. My boots slipped on the wet iron. I hung by one hand for a terrifying second, dangling over the abyss of the atrium floor where the horde was gathering. They were trying to climb up to me. A pyramid of gray bodies was forming at the base of the trellis, infected, climbing over infected, a writhing mound of flesh reaching for my boots. "Come on," I grunted, swinging my leg up to find purchase. I reached the level of the sky bridge. It was 10 feet to my right, a sheer drop between me and the glass roof of the connector tunnel. I had to jump. Again. I braced my feet against the ironwork. I took a breath. I looked at the glass roof of the bridge. It was curved, slippery, and 20 feet above the stone floor of the walkway. If I missed, or if the glass broke, I fell into the crowd below. "Math," I whispered. "Velocity times mass equals impact." I pushed off. For a second, I was flying. Then, I hit the glass. It didn't break. It held, but it was wet. I slid. I scrambled for a grip on the smooth surface. My boots squealing. I was sliding off the side, toward the edge, toward the drop. My fingers caught the metal seam of the frame. I jerked to a halt, my legs dangling over the side. Below me, a dozen infected were jumping, their fingers brushing the soles of my boots. One of them, a man in a maintenance uniform, leaped high enough to grab my ankle. His grip was like iron. He hung there, his dead weight dragging me down. "Get off!" I kicked at him with my other foot. He didn't let go. He started to pull himself up my leg, hand over hand, his jaws snapping. I drew my pistol. I couldn't aim properly hanging like this. I pressed the muzzle against the top of his head. Bang! He dropped. I pulled myself up onto the roof of the sky bridge, gasping, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I didn't have time to rest. The infected in the director's office had figured out the window. They were pouring out, falling like rain, landing on the trellis, on the planter, on the bridge roof behind me. They didn't care about the fall. Broken legs, snapped spines. It didn't matter. If they could move, they hunted. I scrambled along the roof of the bridge toward the elevator bank. The glass tunnel ended at a heavy security door leading into the north tower. I reached the end of the bridge. I looked down. There was a maintenance hatch in the roof. I shot the lock. I kicked the hatch open and dropped into the tunnel. It was empty, quiet. The air here was cool, filtered. I ran to the elevator doors. I hit the call button. Nothing. The power was out. Or the lockdown had killed the lifts. "Think," I hissed, holstering my weapon. "Think, Elias." The express lift. It had a manual override key in the security panel. I used my knife to pry the panel cover off. The key slot was there. I didn't have the key. Damn it. I slammed my fist against the wall. Behind me, the glass roof of the sky bridge shattered. They were coming through the hatch. They were dropping onto the walkway. I looked at the elevator doors. They were stainless steel, solid. But next to them was the fire stairwell. I tried the handle. Locked. Maglocked. I looked at the infected sprinting down the bridge toward me. 10 of them. 20. A wave of gray. I looked at the tablet in my pouch. The data, the cure, or just a record of how we died? I looked at the fire alarm pull station on the wall. If I pulled it, it might trigger the emergency release on the maglocks, or it might just make more noise. I pulled it. Clang, clang, clang. The bells were deafening, but the light on the door handle turned green. I threw the door open and dived into the stairwell just as the lead infected slammed into the frame. I kicked the door shut in his face. His fingers were caught in the jamb. I leaned my full weight against the door, feeling him pushing back, stronger than any man had a right to be. I drew my knife and stabbed his fingers. Black blood sprayed. He didn't pull back. He pushed harder. I fired a round through the door, right at head height. The pressure eased. I slumped. I engaged the deadbolt. I was in the North Tower stairwell. Ground floor. The helipad was on the roof 40 stories up. 40 stories. I started to climb. My legs burned. My lungs burned. I was dehydrated, exhausted, and running on nothing but cortisol and terror. Floor 5. Quiet. Floor 10. I heard scratching behind the door. Floor 15. A scream, distant and echoing. I reached floor 20. I had to stop. I sat on the steps, my head between my knees, trying to stop the rune from spinning. I checked the tablet. Battery, 12%. Come on, I whispered, just a little further. I stood up, and then the lights went out. Total darkness. The emergency backup finally died. I was blind. I froze. In the silence, I heard it. Breathing. Not mine. It was close, right above me, on the landing of floor 21. Heavy, wet, rattling breathing. I fumbled for my weapon light. I clicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness. Sitting on the stairs, blocking the way up, was a thing that used to be a man. He was huge, bigger than Marcus, bigger than Miller. He was wearing the tattered remains of a SWAT uniform, but he wasn't just infected. He was changing. His skin had split. Bone spurs were pushing through his shoulders. His jaw had unhinged, hanging loose, revealing rows of teeth that looked too long, too sharp. He squinted in the light. He raised a hand to shield his eyes. He hissed, but he didn't charge. He stood up slowly, unfolding like a nightmare. He was 7 feet tall. The mutations were accelerating. The virus was adapting, rewriting the host in real time to be a better killer. I raised my pistol. "Move," I said, my voice steady despite the shaking of my hands. He tilted his head. He looked at the gun. He looked at me. And then he smiled, a horrific, skin-splitting grin. He didn't run. He leaped. He covered the 10 feet between us in a single bound. I fired. Bang, bang, bang. 3 rounds to the chest. He didn't even slow down. He slammed into me, driving me back against the wall. The impact knocked the pistol from my hand. It clattered down the stairs into the dark. His hands, huge, clawed, cold wrapped around my throat. He lifted me off the ground like a doll. I kicked. I punched. It was like hitting concrete. He brought my face close to his. His breath smelled of old meat and sulfur. I couldn't breathe. My vision was tunnelling. Black spots danced in the light of the dropped flashlight. I reached for my knife. My fingers brushed the hilt. He squeezed harder. I felt cartilage crack. I drew the knife. I didn't stab him. I couldn't generate the force. I jammed the blade into the exposed muscle of his forearm, twisting it. He roared, a sound that shook dust from the ceiling. He dropped me. I hit the stairs, gasping, coughing. I scrambled backward, looking for my gun. It was gone, fallen down the gap in the railing. I had my knife and 10 rounds in my pocket for a gun I didn't have. The Alpha pulled the knife out of his arm. He looked at it. He dropped it. He took a step toward me. I scrambled up the stairs, away from him. He followed, slow, deliberate. He knew he had me. I reached the door to floor 21, locked. I kicked it. It didn't budge. The Alpha was 5 steps below me. I looked up. The railing gap. I could jump for the next landing. It was a 6-foot vertical leap to catch the railing of floor 22. Impossible. The Alpha lunged. I jumped, My fingers caught the cold steel of the railing above. I swung, my boots scrabbling against the concrete wall. The Alpha swiped at my legs, his claws tearing the fabric of my pants, drawing blood. I pulled myself up. I rolled onto the landing of floor 22. I looked down. The Alpha was staring up at me. He snarled. He grabbed the railing and tore a section of it loose with a screech of metal. He started to climb the outside of the stairwell, hand over hand, pulling himself up the gap. "No," I whispered. I ran. I sprinted up the stairs. Floor 23, floor 24. I could hear him below me. Clang. Clang, clang. He was fast, faster than me. I reached floor 30. My legs were numb. My heart was going to burst. I needed a weapon. I needed anything. I saw a fire hose cabinet. I smashed the glass with my elbow. I grabbed the heavy brass nozzle. It wasn't a gun, but it was heavy. I kept climbing. Floor 35. The sounds below changed. The rhythmic clanging stopped. Silence. I stopped. I listened. Nothing. Had he fallen? Given up? Then I heard it. A scraping sound above me. I looked up. He was there. He had climbed past me in the dark, scaling the central shaft. He was hanging from the railing of floor 36, waiting. He dropped. He landed on me. We tumbled down the stairs together, a ball of violence and pain. We hit the landing of floor 35 hard. I lost the nozzle. I lost my breath. I think I broke a rib. He was on top of me. His weight was crushing. He pinned my arms with his knees. He lowered his face to mine. His mouth opened. I could see the black throat, the rows of teeth. This was it. The math had finally run out. "Get off," I headbutted him. It was like headbutting a brick wall. My vision exploded in white light. Blood ran into my eyes. He didn't flinch. He just lowered his head to feed. Boom. The door to floor 35 flew open. A bright light blinded me. Bang, 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 bang. The sound of a heavy caliber rifle in the enclosed space was physically painful. The Alpha jerked. His head snapped back. Black blood sprayed my face. He slumped forward, dead weight on my chest. "Clear," a voice shouted. "Target down." Someone kicked the Alpha off me. Hands grabbed my vest and hauled me up. I blinked, trying to clear the blood from my eyes. 3 figures stood in the doorway, tactical gear, night vision goggles, military. "Identify," the lead soldier shouted, pointing a rifle at my chest. "Elias," I croaked. "Security. Ethelgard." The soldier lowered his rifle. "You're the one broadcasting the distress signal?" "Distress signal?" I was confused. I didn't. The tablet. In my pouch, it must have been auto-broadcasting on the emergency frequency. "We picked up a level 5 biohazard beacon," the soldier said. "Where the extraction team?" "Where is the package? Where is the data?" I patted my pouch. The tablet was still there. Cracked, but there. "Here," I said. "I have it." "Good," the soldier said. "We're moving. Roof extraction. 5 minutes." "Wait," I said, looking at the dead Alpha. "There are more of them. Hundreds." "We know," the soldier said grimly. "We passed them on the way down. The stairwell is compromised. We have to blow it." "Blow it?" "Charges are set. We seal the shaft, trap them below." He handed me a detonator. "Your facility," he said. "Your Honor." I looked at the detonator. I looked down the dark stairwell. I could hear them coming. The low moan of the horde rising from the depths. "Do it," I whispered. I pressed the button. Thump. The explosion was deep, muffled. The building shook. Dust poured from the ceiling. "Move!" the soldier yelled. We ran up the stairs. Floor 36, 37, 38. We reached the roof access door. The soldier kicked it open. Wind. Cold, fresh air. The sound of rotors. A Black Hawk helicopter was hovering over the helipad, its downdraft whipping the smoke that was rising from the city below. The city. I stopped. I walked to the edge of the roof. Seattle was burning. It wasn't just a few fires. The entire horizon was a wall of flame. Smoke columns twisted into the sky like black tornadoes. The Space Needle was gone, toppled, or obscured by the smoke. And the sound? It wasn't sirens anymore. It was a low, constant roar. The sound of a city screaming. "Let's go," the soldier shouted, pulling me toward the bird. I climbed into the helicopter. I strapped in. The soldier sat next to me. "We have the package," he said into his headset. "RTB. Situation is FUBAR." The helicopter lifted off. I looked down at the Ethelgard facility. The roof was swarming. They were pouring out of the vents, out of the stairwell access, hundreds of them. Thousands. They looked up at the helicopter. They reached for us. And then, the roof collapsed. The charges hadn't just sealed the stairwell, they had compromised the structural integrity of the upper levels. The roof caved in, swallowing the horde in a cloud of dust and debris. I leaned back, closing my eyes. "We made it," the soldier said, clapping me on the shoulder. "You're safe." I touched the tablet in my pocket. The cure, the answer. I looked at the soldier. I looked at the pilot. "Where are we going?" I asked. "The Alpine outpost," the soldier said. "Secure command. It's safe." "Safe," I repeated. I looked at the soldier's arm. There was a tear in his sleeve. A small, jagged rip, and beneath it, a scratch. It wasn't bleeding red. I stared at it. The math. The cold, hard math. "How long?" I asked. "How long what?" the soldier asked, following my gaze. "You saw the scratch." He froze. I must have snagged it on the door," he said, his voice trembling. "It's nothing." I looked at his eyes. The pupils were already dilating. I looked at the pilot. He was busy flying. He didn't see. I looked at the other two soldiers. They were checking their gear, exhausted. I slowly reached for the soldier's sidearm, sitting in his holster. "It's nothing," he whispered, a tear leaking from his eye. "Please, it's nothing." I pulled the gun. "I'm sorry," I said. The helicopter banked, turning away from the burning city, flying into the setting sun. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that the war wasn't over. It had just changed venues. I tightened my grip on the pistol. Chapter 5, I whispered to the wind. 0 hour. The helicopter banked, turning away from the burning city, flying into the setting sun. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that the war wasn't over. It had just changed venues. I tightened my grip on the pistol. "I'm sorry," I said again, my voice barely audible over the rotor thump. The soldier turned his head, confusion warring with the infection already clouding his eyes. "What?" I didn't explain. I didn't justify. I raised the weapon and put a round through his temple. The sound was lost in the engine noise. A flat crack that barely registered against the mechanical roar. He slumped forward, his head hitting the instrument panel. Blood sprayed the plexiglass. The pilot jerked, startled by the movement. He turned, his eyes wide behind his visor. "What the hell? What are you doing?" "He was bitten," I yelled, pointing at the dead soldier's arm. "Look at his arm." The pilot glanced down, saw the torn sleeve, the blackened veins spreading like ink under the skin. His face went pale. He looked at me, then at the other two soldiers in the back. They were staring at me, weapons half raised, shock paralyzing their training. "Check him," I screamed. "Check the wound." One of the soldiers leaned forward, ripping the dead man's sleeve further. He saw it. He recoiled as if burned. "Jesus Christ. It's black. The blood is black." "Throw him out," I ordered. "Now. We can't just—" "He's dead," I roared. "And if he wakes up in here, we're all dead. Throw him out." The two soldiers unbuckled the corpse. They dragged him to the open door. The wind whipped at their uniforms. the smoke from the city below stinging our eyes. They shoved him out. I watched him fall, a dark speck tumbling into the inferno of Seattle. I slumped back in my seat, the adrenaline crashing out of my system, leaving me shaking and cold. I looked at the pistol in my hand. 1 round left in the chamber, 11 in the mag. "Where are we going?" I asked the pilot again. "The Alpine Outpost," he said, his voice tight. "It's a secure facility in the Cascades, underground bunkers. Self-sufficient. Is it safe? It's supposed to be. Supposed to be, just like the Ethelgard facility was supposed to be secure. Just like the containment protocols were supposed to work. Just like Marcus was supposed to go home to his wife." I looked out the window. The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and blood reds. Below us, the world was ending. The highways were clogged with stalled traffic, miles of metal snakes winding through the dark. I saw fires burning in the suburbs, isolated pockets of chaos spreading outward like a cancer. I saw military convoys stalled on the interstates, overwhelmed by the tide of the dead. We flew over a small town. I saw people running in the streets, tiny figures fleeing from other tiny figures. I saw a house burning, the flames illuminating a desperate last stand on the roof. It was everywhere. "How much fuel?" I asked. "Enough to get there," the pilot said. "Maybe 20 minutes reserve." 20 minutes, the radio crackled. Static at first, then a voice. Panicked, breathless. "Any station, this is Alpine Control. We have a breach. Sector 4 is compromised. They're inside the perimeter. Repeat, they are inside the perimeter." The pilot froze. "Control, this is Raven 30, inbound with high-value asset. ETA 10 minutes. What is your status?" "Static." Then, "Overrun. Do not approach." I repeat, do not approach. "The landing zone is hot. They're on the pad. Oh God, they're on the pad." The transmission cut out with a scream that chilled my blood even over the engine noise. The pilot looked at me. "We can't land there." "Where else?" I asked. "Nowhere." That was the fallback. That was the last safe zone in the sector. "We have fuel," I said. "We find somewhere else." "Where?" "The city is gone. The bases are gone. The outpost is gone." "North," I said. "We go north. Canada, the mountains. Somewhere cold. They don't like the cold." "We don't have the range for Canada," the pilot said. "We have maybe 40 miles left." I looked at the map on his kneeboard. 40 miles. It wasn't enough. "There," I pointed. "The logging camp, up near the pass. It's isolated, defensible, and it has a fuel depot for the heavy machinery. If we can land there, refuel." "If it's not overrun," the pilot countered. "It's in the middle of nowhere. Population 0. If anywhere is safe, it's there." The pilot hesitated, then banked the helicopter. We turned north, following the spine of the mountains. The light was fading fast. The shadows in the valleys were deepening into black pools. We flew over endless forests, dark and silent. It looked peaceful from up here. You couldn't see the monsters in the trees. 5 minutes out, the pilot said. "Fuel light is on." I checked my gear. My rifle was gone, left in the stairwell. I had the pistol, my knife, and the tablet. The cure, the hope. The logging camp appeared out of the gloom. A clearing in the trees, a cluster of portable buildings, heavy machinery parked in rows, and a fuel tank. A big white cylinder sitting on a concrete pad. "It looks clear," one of the soldiers said, scanning with night vision. "Set us down," I said. "Near the tank." The pilot brought us in low. The rotor wash kicked up a storm of pine needles and dust. We touched down with a heavy thud. "Engine stays running," I ordered. "You two." I pointed at the soldiers. "Secure the perimeter. Check the buildings. I'll check the fuel." We jumped out. The air was cold, biting. It smelled of pine sap and diesel. It was the best thing I had ever smelled. I ran to the fuel tank. The pump was old. Manual. I checked the gauge. Half full. Enough to get us to Canada. Enough to get us anywhere. Clear, one of the soldiers shouted from the bunkhouse. Clear, the other yelled from the maintenance shed. It's good, the pilot said, his voice cracking with relief over the headset. Hook it up. Let's fill her and go. I grabbed the hose. I started to drag it toward the helicopter. And then I heard it. Not a roar. Not a scream, a twig snapping. I froze. I spun around, scanning the tree line. Nothing, just darkness and trees. Elias? The pilot asked. What's wrong? Quiet, I hissed into my mic. I listened. The wind in the branches, the whine of the turbine, and footsteps. Soft, careful. Not the shambling drag of the dead. These were deliberate. Contact, I yelled, dropping the hose and raising my pistol. They came out of the trees. Not infected, men, 6 of them, dressed in hunting gear, camo, flannel, carrying rifles, hunting rifles, shotguns, AR-15s. They looked rough, bearded, dirty. Survivors, or what passed for survivors on day 1. Step away from the bird, the lead man shouted. He had a scoped deer rifle aimed at my chest. Hands up. We're friendly, I yelled. We just need fuel. Friendly don't mean shit anymore, the man spat. That's a military bird. You got supplies. You got weapons. We're taking it. You don't know how to fly it, I said, keeping my hands visible but near my weapon. We'll figure it out, or we'll strip it. Don't matter to me. Now step away. The 2 soldiers by the buildings raised their rifles. Drop it, one of the soldiers shouted. U.S. Army, stand down. The standoff lasted a second, a single heartbeat. Then someone fired. I don't know who. Maybe a nervous finger on a trigger. Maybe the wind. The crack of a rifle shot shattered the night. The soldier by the bunkhouse dropped, a hole in his chest. All hell broke loose. The survivors opened fire. The remaining soldier returned fire, diving behind a bulldozer. The pilot screamed as a round shattered the cockpit glass. I dove behind the fuel tank. Bullets pinged off the metal above my head. Cease fire, I screamed. You're drawing them. The noise will draw them. They didn't listen. They were scared. Desperate men fighting for scraps at the end of the world. They didn't understand the math yet. I peeked around the tank. The lead survivor was advancing on the helicopter. He was shouting orders. I took a breath. I aimed. Bang! I hit him in the leg. He went down screaming. Flank them, another survivor yelled. I looked at the helicopter. The pilot was slumped over the controls, dead. The engine was whining. The rotors spinning erratically. We were grounded. Damn it, I whispered. I looked at the soldier behind the bulldozer. He was pinned down, taking heavy fire. Cover me, I yelled into the radio. I'm hit, the soldier gasped. I can't move. I looked at the tablet in my pocket. The data. I looked at the fuel tank. If I couldn't fly out, and I couldn't fight my way out. I looked at the hose I had dropped. It was leaking fuel onto the ground. A puddle of aviation gas spreading toward the helicopter. I looked at the tree line. Shadows were moving, not men, not survivors. The noise, the gunfire, it had drawn them. A horde was emerging from the forest. Dozens of them. Hundreds, drawn by the dinner bell. They hit the survivors first. The screams changed. They went from angry shouts to terrified shrieks. The gunfire turned frantic, wild. I saw a man firing a shotgun point blank into a mass of gray bodies. He dropped 2, 3, 4. Then they swarmed him. They pulled him down. The soldier behind the bulldozer screamed as they found him. I was alone behind the tank. The horde was washing over the camp. They were tearing the survivors apart. They were swarming the helicopter. I looked at the fuel hose. I looked at the tank. I looked at the tablet. If I died here, the data died with me. The cure died. But there was nowhere to run. The camp was surrounded. Think, I hissed. Think. The maintenance shed. It was metal. Corrugated steel. One door. No windows. It was 10 yards away. I sprinted. I broke cover and ran for the shed. An infected saw me. One of the hunters, already turned, his throat torn out. He lunged. I fired. Bang. He dropped. I reached the shed. I threw the door open and dove inside. I slammed it shut and threw the bolt. I backed away into the darkness. I clicked on my weapon light. The shed was full of tools, chainsaws, axes, gas cans, and a radio, a heavy-duty shortwave set on a workbench. I ran to it. I turned it on. Static. I scanned the frequencies. Nothing. Nothing. Then, a voice. This is Anchorage. Safe zone. Broadcasting on Anchorage, Alaska. I grabbed the mic. Anchorage. This is Elias. I have the data. I have the cure sequence. Do you copy? Static. Anchorage. I am at the pass logging camp. Coordinates. I looked at the GPS on the wall map. Coordinates. 48.7 north, 120.6 west. Do you copy? Copy. Signal weak. Repeat. I have the data. Project Thanatos. I need extraction. Thud. The door shook. They were here. They're outside, I yelled. I'm barricaded. I need help. Too far, no assets. Hold position. Hold position. I looked at the door. It was buckling. The metal was bending inward. I looked around the shed. There was a loft, a storage platform up in the rafters. I climbed the ladder. I pulled it up after me. I sat in the dark, 30 feet above the floor. The door burst open. They poured in, a tide of gray flesh. They filled the shed. They sniffed the air. They looked around. They couldn't see me. They couldn't smell me. Over the gasoline and oil, they milled about, growling, snapping. I sat there, clutching the tablet. I was alive. I checked my watch. 10 p.m. 14 hours. That's how long it had been since I clocked in. Since the world ended, I listened to them below me. The sound of their breathing. The wet clicking purr. I was alive. But for how long? I looked at the radio on the bench below. It was swarming with them. I couldn't reach it. I looked at the roof of the shed. There was a skylight. I could climb out. I could get to the roof. And then what? Wait for a rescue that wasn't coming? Wait to starve? Wait to freeze? I looked at the tablet. The battery was at 4%. I unlocked it. I opened the files, genetic sequences, viral loads, mutation rates. It was all Greek to me. But to someone, somewhere, it might mean life. I tapped the screen. Upload to cloud backup. Searching for signal, I held the tablet up toward the skylight. Signal found. Uploading. 1%. 5%. Below me, an infected looked up. He saw me. He roared. The others looked up. They started to climb the shelves. They started to pile up on each other, building a pyramid of bodies to reach me. 10%. 20%. I drew my pistol. 7 rounds left. I aimed at the first one to reach the loft edge. Bang. He fell back into the crowd. 30%. Another one climbed up. I shot him. Bang. 40%. They were getting faster. They were learning. I kicked the next one in the face. He grabbed my boot. I stomped on his fingers until they broke. 50%. I looked at the skylight. I could break it. I could climb out, but the upload would stop if I lost the signal. I had to stay. 60%. Come on, I whispered. Come on. 2 of them reached the edge at the same time. I shot one. Click. Empty. I threw the gun at the other one. It hit him in the face. He stumbled but didn't fall. I drew my knife. 70%. He lunged. I stabbed him in the neck. We wrestled on the edge of the platform. He was strong. So strong, I shoved him off. He took the knife with him. I was unarmed. 80%. 3 more were climbing up. I backed into the corner. I held the tablet up. 90%. Please, I begged. Just finish. The first infected crawled onto the platform. It was the pilot. His face was a ruin of glass cuts and blood. His eyes were white. He hissed. 95%. He crawled toward me. 98%. He grabbed my leg. 99%. He bit me. I screamed. I kicked him away. Upload complete. I looked at the screen. Data sent. I dropped the tablet. I looked at my leg. The bite was deep. The blood was red, for now. I looked at the pilot. He was coming back. Behind him, 5 more. I stood up. I walked to the edge of the platform. I looked down at the sea of monsters. I looked at the skylight. The moon was shining through, a beautiful full moon. I felt the burn start in my leg, the fire in my veins. 45 seconds, I whispered. I wasn't going to let them turn me. I wasn't going to become one of them. I looked at the gas can stored on the loft. I grabbed one. I unscrewed the cap. I poured it over the edge, dousing the horde below. I poured it on the platform. I poured it on myself. The smell was sharp, stinging. I reached into my pocket, my lighter, my lucky Zippo. I flicked it open. The flame danced, small and yellow in the dark. The pilot lunged. I dropped the lighter. The world turned white. The heat was instantaneous. The roar of the fire drowned out the screams of the infected. I felt the pain for a second. Then nothing. I was flying. I was rising above the shed, above the trees, above the mountains. I saw the logging camp burning below me, a beacon in the night. I saw the helicopter, engulfed in flames. I saw the city to the south, a glowing ember on the horizon. And I saw the signal from the tablet, a stream of data traveling through the air, bouncing off satellites, reaching out to the world. I had done the math. 1 life, 1 death, billions saved. It was a good trade. My name is Elias. I was a private security contractor. I worked at the Ethelgard biotech facility, and I saved the world. End of recording.